This discussion will start us on understanding how to think about supplementation of forages for cattle. The thought process behind supplementation is a little different than ration balancing, although they're very similar in many ways. First, recall that supplementation is providing a specific nutrient to alleviate an imbalance in the principal diet component. In this case, the principal diet component is grazed forage. Forage is not designed to meet the requirements of cattle, so there are often imbalances in nutrients that restrict growth in some way. These imbalances change over the grazing season and aren't necessarily the same from year to year, which just makes the process more fun. Another foundational concept here is that, in general, we would like to make the forage our primary source of nutrients because it is the cheapest source of nutrients. We want to manage the forage so that we minimize supplement needs. And then, when that is not feasible, use a strategic supplement to maximize forage use. That's not totally the goal in all cases, but it's a good default position to start your thinking about supplementation. Here are a list of nutrients that we are concerned with in cattle nutrition. In grazing, protein and minerals are often the most common nutrients we need to supplement, although energy can be a factor too. Fortunately, we rarely need to worry about vitamins or fat in grazed forages, except in a few niche scenarios. We never need to worry about fiber because all forage is full of it. So let's get down in the nuts and bolts of ruminant nutrition. You can see here, okay, just kidding. Nutrition is really this complicated, but we'll try to make it simpler to get a handle on how to practically supplement cattle in grazing systems. So let's start here. This is an important concept. As the digestibility, or TDN, or energy value, of forages increase, cattle eat more of that forage. This is mostly related to the fact that more digestible forage disappears from the rumen at a faster rate, both through fermentation and passage, which creates space for new forage to be put into the rumen. We want to make sure that cattle have all the nutrients they need to fully utilize all of the digestible material that is available in a forage. So having a measure of digestibility is an important consideration. Crude protein has a little different effect on intake. Forages with more protein cause cattle to eat more forage, but the effect is not linear. Above about 7% crude protein, forage intake increases slowly. This increase is likely mostly due to the fact that protein and digestibility are linked. Below that threshold of about 7% crude protein has a much more dramatic effect. Intake rapidly decreases in forages this low in crude protein. If animals don't eat enough forage, they can't meet their daily nutrient requirements. So a measure of forage crude protein is also an important consideration. Protein and energy, or digestibility, or TDN, need to be in balance. The microbes in the rumen want to ferment the forage and release the energy from it. They use some of that energy to grow and reproduce. That is a good thing for the cow. The more bacteria there are and the faster they grow, the more energy and nutrients will be available to the cow. But these bacteria require nitrogen to fuel this growth. Without nitrogen, they can't grow, even if there is a forage available to ferment. Further, the amount of nitrogen they need is proportional to the amount of digestible forage available. The more digestible forage is available, the more nitrogen the microbes need. The nitrogen they need comes from crude protein. This crude protein can come from the forage itself, But if that's not enough, we have to supplement it. Remember, forages are not designed to meet the requirements of a cow. Here's a way to visualize this relationship. We've got the ratio of energy to crude protein, in this case TDN to crude protein, plotted against intake. If there's a lot of crude protein relative to energy, then the TDN to crude protein ratio will be low and intake will be high. If there isn't enough crude protein for the energy that is available, then the TDN to crude protein ratio is high and intake can be quite low. A threshold number to hold in your mind is a TDN to crude protein ratio of about 7. If TDN is less than 7 times crude protein, then all is good. If TDN is more than 7 times crude protein, intake is probably less than optimal. Take a minute to think through this graph. Here are some examples of forages. Forages A through C vary in nutrient content. Forage B has got the greatest nutritive value. Forage C has the least nutritive value of A through C. But in A through C, you can see that the TDN to crude protein ratio is very close to 7 to 1. It's 6 to 1 in these cases. These forages, A, B, and C, are in pretty good balance all by themselves. Forage D has way more crude protein available than what is needed to digest the energy in forage D. It has a ratio of 3 to 1. Forage D is what wheat pasture looks like. It has a lot of digestible energy available, but it has an excess of crude protein. So the TDN to crude protein ratio is very low. It's 3 to 1. Forage E has a ratio of 10 to 1. This forage doesn't have enough crude protein available. It's got a moderate energy value of 56, but there's not enough nitrogen available in this forage for the microbes to take full advantage of that. The TDN to crude protein ratio is about 10 to 1. It's too high. Forage F is a really low quality forage. It has a TDN value of 48, which means intake is probably going to be fairly low regardless. But it has a TDN to crude protein ratio of 14. This means that the rumen bacteria are way short on nitrogen, so they can't even take advantage of the meager amount of energy that is available here. Intake of this forage without supplementation will be very, very low. A few reminders. We aren't talking about a balanced diet in the way many nutritionists might use the term. When we're talking about balancing TDN and crude protein here, when we're talking about forages, we're not really talking about meeting the animal's specific nutrient requirements for growth or lactation, etc. What we're talking about here is trying to maximize the use of the forage. We're trying to get the most out of the forage that we can, whatever that is. It still might not meet the animal's requirement, but if we get the most out of the forage that we can, we should be getting much closer to meeting the animal's requirement, and we're doing it more cost effectively. So this is an interesting relationship to get your mind wrapped around. It really helps to guide you into knowing what type of supplement you should be considering in different forage scenarios. So for you Star Wars fans, remember that you were meant to bring balance. So take a look at this forage. What do you think the nutrient content is? Is it low in digestibility or high in digestibility? It's pretty low. This is dormant warm season perennial grass. This is about as low as it gets on the forage quality scale. What about crude protein? It's also pretty low. So what is the TDN to crude protein ratio of this forage? It's about 12 to 1. Is this forage out of balance? Which way? Which nutrient do you need to supplement to bring it back into balance? And the way to think about that is, yes, it's certainly out of balance. How is it out of balance? It's too low in crude protein. There's not enough nitrogen available. So you as the manager need to supplement nitrogen to bring this forage back into balance. How about this forage? What do you think the TDN content is? It's pretty high. This is wheat pasture, a cool season annual grass. This is about as good as it gets for cattle forage. What about crude protein? It's really high. What is the TDN to crude protein ratio of wheat pasture? It's 3 to 1. So is this forage out of balance? Yes, it certainly is out of balance. Which way is it out of balance? Well, it's actually got excessive protein. There's more nitrogen available in this forage than there is digestible energy to use the nitrogen. So which nutrient do you need to supplement to bring it back into balance? Well, if you were trying to maximize all the nutrients that were available in this forage, you could actually supplement energy, supplement carbohydrates to help bring this forage back closer to balance. That would actually let you take advantage of the nitrogen that's in this forage. What about this forage? I'll let you make your guesses. But to me, this looks like maybe a warm season grass in the early summer, and the TDN to crude protein ratio is probably near 7 to 1. This forage is probably in balance. Supplementing either protein or energy isn't needed to maximize the use of this forage. Hopefully these cattle don't have super high requirements like a dairy cow, and hopefully they're doing pretty well on this forage all by itself. If these are just stocker cattle that you want to gain 1.5 pounds or 2 pounds a day, this kind of forage can probably support those animals' requirements all by itself. No extra cost is needed. You probably don't need to spend any money on nutrient supplementation here. This figure shows how this relationship might change over time. At the beginning of the grazing season, the forage may have excess crude protein available and be in balance during the middle of the season. Then it might be deficient in protein at the end of the season. This pattern is quite common in warm season grasses. Next time, we'll talk about some specific supplementation programs for stockers. Thanks.